Hello everyone, I'm Joseph Coughlin and the Manager of Spectrum Policy and Awards at Comric. So the aim of this session is to provide an overview of the award process, in particular the application stage, the qualification stage and the notification of grant stage. The main stage and assignment stage will be stepped through by Dodicon in the sessions to follow. The agenda for this session will firstly cover the spectrum and licensing information and then give an overview of the award stages, noting that Dodicon will cover the auction stages in more detail in a later presentation. Okay, the award spectrum is as follows. There is a total of 470 MHz of spectrum being made available in the award, allowing a potential licensee to have certainty on rights of use for the next 20 years. The award spectrum is as shown in the 4 band plans, and for the purposes of the award, there are 5 bands being made available. So there's 60 MHz or 2x30 MHz of spectrum in the 700 MHz duplex. There's 120 MHz or 2x60 in the 2.1 GHz band. 100 MHz of unpaired spectrum in the 2.3 GHz band, and the 2.6 GHz band plan shows 190 MHz of spectrum. Within that, there are 2 bands, 140 MHz or 2x70 MHz of FDD spectrum in the 2.6 GHz FDD band, and 50 MHz of unpaired spectrum in the 2.6 GHz TDD band. Within the 5 bands, there are 8 spectrum blocks, and these are as set out in paragraph 2.11 of the IM. For example, in the 2.1 GHz band, there is only, say, one type of spectrum block, so that's a 2.1 GHz band block, as all the individual blocks in the band have the same characteristics. However, in the 2.6 GHz band, there are 4 different spectrum blocks. There are 2.6 GHz band FDD blocks, and 3 spectrum blocks in the 2.6 GHz TDD band, the 2 fixed frequency blocks at either end, and the generic blocks in the middle, as illustrated in the band plan in the bottom right hand corner of the slide. The NBSA2 Liberalised Use License is the main license to be obtained following the award process, and this license will allow licensees to use the spectrum, i.e. provide the services on a national basis. The license contains a number of conditions. For example, certain technical conditions to facilitate coexistence between services, and obligations in relation to coverage and rollout and quality of service. The spectrum blocks, as discussed on the previous slide, to be included on any license will be determined via the award process. The spectrum blocks are being sold in the award as lots with different start and end dates due to the time slicing of the relevant bands. Overall, and depending on the spectrum rights won, the licenses will be available to commence on the 14th of February 2022, or such other date as may be specified by Comric, and shall expire on the 13th of February 2042. Spectrum fees will consist of a once-off spectrum access fee, or SAF, and an annual spectrum usage fee, or SUF. The amount of the SUF is fixed, subject to CPI adjustments on an annual basis, whereas the amount of the SAF is determined by competition in the auction. Annex 2 of the Information Memorandum sets out the draft regulations, which contain the different license types that can be issued in respect of the award process, and also the relevant conditions and obligations that will apply over the term of the license. In total, there are 113 individual lots available in the award, and they are grouped into 15 lot categories. Within this, there are 2 lot types, A lots and B lots. The A lots are fixed frequency lots, as they have certain unique technical characteristics, and if you bid on these lots, you know exactly the frequencies that will be obtained. B lots are generic frequency lots, and the exact frequencies that will be obtained will be determined in the assignment round. There are 6 A lots, and these align to the same 6 lot categories, while there are 107 B lots across the other 9 lot categories. The number of lots in each of the 15 lot categories and the duration of rights of use in each lot category is illustrated in the figure below. Details on the license fees are as set out in section 2.3.6 of the IM. Tables 15 and 16 in section 3.1 of the IM, and the initial bid form also captures the reserve prices and annual spectrum usage fee per lot before any CPI adjustment. as well as the other details of each lot category, for example, the lot sizes, the number of lots in each lot category, etc. As noted earlier, the spectrum access fee for a winning bidder is determined by competition during the auction, where the reserve price per lot or package of lots is the lowest this value can be. Now let's look at the award stages. The award process has 5 distinct stages, followed by a transition phase. And I'm going to cover the key elements of the first 2 stages and also touch on the notification and grant stage and transition phase. Doddy Conn will go into detail on the auction stages, which will include the relevance of the initial bid as submitted in the application stage. As there are 2 phases for submitting the application, phase 1 and phase 2, the application and qualification stages overlap. The application stage started with the publication of the IM on the 16th of April and will continue until the deadline for the submission of phase 2 application documentation, which is the 6th of August. The qualification stage will start on the deadline for the submission of phase 1 application documentation, which is 5:30 on the 18th of June, and end on the 3rd of September. Within that period, there are 4 key elements. The 2 application deadlines, captured by the green boxes, and the 2 opportunities for asking questions in advance of those deadlines, captured by the blue boxes. First, in relation to the questions. The phase 1 questions are open to all interested parties and can be delivered to Comreg's offices in hard copy from Monday the 10th to Friday the 14th of May at the times set out in section 3.3.1 of the IM. Comreg will publish all questions together with their associated responses on an anonymous basis on its website. Comreg intends to respond to the questions on an ongoing basis, but will provide final answers to the questions no later than Friday the 28th of May. Phase 2 questions are open for applicants only, i.e. those that have submitted phase 1 applications, and can be submitted via the dedicated file transfer portal. The details of the file transfer portal will be given to applicants at the time of submitting the phase 1 application documentation. In a similar way to phase 1 questions, Comreg will respond to phase 2 questions together on an anonymous basis, but will distribute the anonymized questions and answers to all applicants through the file transfer portal. In relation to the 2 application deadlines, the phase 1 application documentation is to be submitted in hard copy format only. To do so, you need to call to make an appointment on working days between Wednesday the 2nd and Thursday the 17th of June. The number to call and the times to make a call is as set out in section 3.3.7 of the IM. At this call, you'll be given one of the remaining appointment times to submit the documentation by the application deadline. It's important to remember that once the first application is submitted, the restrictions on award process related communications come into effect as set out in section 3.3.6 of the IM. Phase 2 application documentation may be submitted in hard copy or electronically with e-signatures via the dedicated file transfer portal. The statement of what method you will use in phase 2 needs to be included on the phase 1 application form, and there is a section for that on the form. The deadline is the same for both options, but for those that wish to submit in hard copy for phase 2, they will need to make an appointment as set out in section 3.3.7 of the IM. Okay, in terms of the phase 1 application documentation, the material needed is as set out in section 3.3 of the IM, but the key elements are a completed and signed phase 1 application form, a detailed ownership structure document, including a list of insiders, and appropriate evidence in respect of authorized agents. So insiders are those parties that may have become aware of confidential information, as set out in section 3.3.6 of the IM, and could be, for example, an economic advisor or another party financing the bid of an applicant. And it's important that details in relation to these parties are provided as part of the documentation and updated should they change. Should there be a potential conflict between applicants, this will need to be resolved to the satisfaction of Comreg. An authorised agent is a person that is entitled to bind the applicant contractually in relation to the award process and it's also important that we see appropriate evidence in relation to that. For ease of use, the Phase 1 application form has been made available in an editable format, and this is published as document 2140A on ComReg's website. As noted before, this includes a statement of whether the applicant will submit its Phase 2 application documentation electronically with e-signatures or in hard copy. In relation to the electronic submission, applicants should ensure that they can meet the requirements for this as set out in paragraphs 3.33 to 3.42 of the IM. Annex 1 of ComReg document 2139 provides some practical information for applicants on items that need particular attention in the submission of the documentation, and I encourage applicants to consider this in advance of making the submission. Following the deadline for withdrawal of an application, which is Friday the 13th of August, the bidder training programme will commence. There will be three aspects to this: the bidder playground, which will allow bidders to experience and become comfortable with the EAS while testing different bid scenarios; the online WDP, which allows bidders load different sets of bids into the algorithm and obtain the results; and mock auctions. Should an auction be required, the mock auctions will be scheduled to occur prior to the first primary bid round and will be conducted via scripted scenarios to demonstrate some of the activity rules. For example, seeing how a relaxed primary bid is submitted, along with any necessary chain bids. A further more detailed presentation on how to use the bidder playground and online WDP is scheduled for Tuesday the 17th of August. Of the three bidder training tools, the bidder playground and online WDP provides the greatest opportunity to become familiar with the EAS, and I would encourage you to take advantage of these tools. In one of the later sessions, Dodicon will also give a demonstration of the current beta version of the EAS to give a sense of how the bidding will work. In terms of the next steps in the process, we would move on to the main stage and the assignment stage, and these stages will be explained in more detail by Dodicon in some of the following sessions. Following the assignment stage and the public announcement of the results of the auction, we move into the notification of grant stage. The details of the notification of grant stage are set out in section 3.7 of the IM. So this will include the formal notification to winning bidders, the payment of the relevant fees, any deposits that need to be returned will happen, and ultimately the licenses will be issued. As part of these notifications, the relevant licensees will need to develop transition plans and submit them to ComReg to ensure an orderly transition in the 2.1 and 2.3 GHz bands. Okay, with that, it concludes this presentation on the overview of the award process. I invite you to view the next presentation on the main stage and assignment stage delivered by Dodicon.